Question number 4, Joanne Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Building and Housing. What reports has he received to show the government's housing reform program is increasing the supply and affordability of housing?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
The latest figures show that residential building activity in the last year grew by 21% to over $12 billion, which is the highest level of investment in residential activity that New Zealand has ever seen. The 29,627 homes is more than double that of 5 years ago and is the second highest on record. Secondly, if we look at the real estate figures today out, it shows that for the first time in 5 years, house price increases in Auckland is down to single digits at 7%. That is welcomed. Today we've also had the Massey housing affordability data released. It shows that housing affordability has improved across New Zealand in every region except Hamilton and Queenstown, and that housing affordability in every part of New Zealand is better than what it was under the previous government.
Supplementary.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Joanne Hayes.
Thank you. Was the claim made yesterday in Parliament that only 18 affordable houses had been built in Auckland in the last 3 years correct?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
No. More than 10 times that number have been built in the very first special housing area. At Weymouth, 190 homes have been built with an average price of $450,000. And then if you go to the second special housing area in Hobsonville, 70 have been built below 400, 212 beyond 500, 45 below 450, a total of 327 homes in the second housing area. If we look at the data from the Home Start scheme, 300 grants have been made in Auckland for new homes since the scheme began. The claim of just 18 in 3 years is so disconnected from reality, I assume Mr Trump wrote it.
Order. Order.
Supplementary question.
Order. Order.
National Party MPs that went to his election.
Order. Order. Now, I've got one or two regular interjectors in my sights. I will deal with them relatively severely if they continue to yell across the House, and on this occasion it's occurring from both sides of the House. Take that as a warning. Supplementary question, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
How can he, Minister, boast about his government's housing reform program when his own department doesn't collect Code of Compliance certificates issued once a house has been built?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, that member has made the mistake of disconnecting the number of code compliance certificates from building consents. And there's a very simple reason for that, Mr Peters. There's a very simple reason. When you build an apartment complex of 100 homes, there's 100 building consents, but just one code compliance certificate. The member needs a far better practical knowledge of the building sector.
Supplementary question.
Order. Supplementary question. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
If the Reserve Bank and the Auckland Chamber of Commerce say that in Auckland last year 9,251 consents were dished out but only 5,073 houses completions happened, less than half of the 13,000 need for migrants going to Auckland alone, why does he just sit down and resign?
Oh, Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick
Because
Smith.
that member is so disconnected from the realities of the building industry that actually the amount of building activity in Auckland and across the country is at record levels, now over $12 billion per year. That's reflected in the GDP figures, that's reflected in the employment figures, so that every part of the building system is going gangbusters.
Speaker, point of order.
Order. Order.
Point
of order. The Right Honourable Winston
Speaker, I
Peters.
seek to table Local Government Official Information Meetings Act request from the Auckland Council to us exclusively, New Zealand First, and also Mr Smith's answer on the matter to us to a written question. perhaps we'll see who's disconnected
Order,
now.
order. I'll put the leave with regards to the first document. I will not put leave with regards to the second document, which I take it to be an answer to a written question, which are now already available to all members. So leave is sought to table some local government information from the Auckland Council to the New Zealand First Party. Is there any objection to that being tabled? There is not. It can be tabled. Supplementary question.
Thank you.
Supplementary question, Joanne Hayes.
What credence does he give to claims that the building consent data cannot be relied upon, given that some developments, like the high-profile Flow development involving about 100 apartments, is now not proceeding?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
The reason I have confidence in the monthly building consent data is that it correlates historically so closely to census data on the number of changes in houses. So, for instance, in Auckland, between the last two census, the number of homes increased by 33,777. The number of building consents issued over the relevant period was 33,703, i.e. within 1%. There has been some townhouse and apartment developments like Flow that have not proceeded, but building consents for those have not been issued or counted. Building consents trigger substantial fees and levies, amounting for a development such as Flow for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and are generally only sought when finance is confirmed and development is ready to go, and that is why this House can have confidence in those very strong, growing building consent numbers.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Joanne Hayes.
Thank you. What progress has been made in minimising the impact of appeals on bringing the new Auckland Unitary Plan into effect and enabling the 420,000 new home capacities to be utilised?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, the Government has been working with the Auckland Council to minimise the impact of those appeals and to take advantage of the new unitary plan. I'm very pleased today that the appeal pleadings have been significantly amended so that they only impact on 29,000 of those 430,000, i.e. about 7%. That means as of today, 90% of the new housing capacity in the Auckland Unitary Plan takes effect.